Yeah, that was my second novel, and in a way, that was my first novel. I mean, I had been doing research for that novel for about 10 years. I mean, I started it long before I did Interview with the Vampire, which was really the first work that I had published. And what I was trying to do there, more than bring to life the free colored community that had existed in the 1840s, what I was really trying to do was write about stuff that the free people of color thought about every day of their lives, rather than just issues of race, things of that kind. I was interested in writing about them as people first and free people of color second.
What was the French term that you used in the book?
Gens de couleur libre. I'm terrible at pronouncing the French, but that's it. It means people of color, free people of color. In those days, before the Civil War, anybody with colored blood was required to identify themselves when they signed their name. A man of color had to put de couleur libre after his name, of the initials, FMC, free man of color, and that's what they were known as. I mean, that was the phrase that identified them, and they had a real place in society in New Orleans. I mean, they were never admitted to white society. That was one of the tragedies of their lives, that no matter how much education or wealth they attained, they could never intermarry with whites. They could never really be doctors or lawyers. They could never even go to the same restaurants, the same, in the theater, they had their own tier, their own special balcony at the opera, but they had their own place in that they were respected. There were many of them, as you know, if you read the book. I mean, they had a large business community, and they were very, very good at a whole variety of different crafts and trades, and they really had almost a place in the affection of white society at that time. After the Civil War, everything changed, and they lost their autonomy as a group. They tried very much to fight the reactionary elements in the South after the Civil War. They fought a very bitter battle for the rights of all people, black people of color and black people, and they lost that war. And as everybody knows, I mean, one of the most repressive eras in our history is, with regard to race relations, was the period after the Civil War, in the South. I mean, that right up to the 1900s, that's when all the lynchings took place, and there was terrible violence and so forth. And the free people of color, their society broke up, as I understand it, and they intermarried and intermingled and went into the general black population. I think there's still people down there who are descended from them, and they see themselves probably as set apart, and they're very conscious of having this history and so forth. But before the Civil War is when they really had the identity, and that's what I wanted to write about in Feast of All Saints, when they had a whole society that was their own.
It's especially some of the people you talked about in the book were the inventors of daguerreotype.
Well, they're actually, there were colored daguerreotypists. There was a famous colored inventor that worked out a process for refining sugar. There were colored painters. There were colored sculptors who were famous for doing beautiful sculpture that was in the graveyards of New Orleans at that time. There was one very famous colored playwright, Victor Sejour, that went to Paris and scored many successes in Paris. They really excelled in everything that they could excel in. I mean, they were kept out of so much that all their energy went into the arts and to the trades, as I mentioned.
Marcel sort of follows a pattern sometimes you have for lead male characters in at least physiological appearance.
I find it hard, actually, to describe characters. I mean, when I see people, I mainly see their eyes, and I think that's what I describe: fine features, beautiful eyes, sensitive hands, things of that kind. But Marcel is definitely the hero of that book. I mean, he's not just the main character. I think it's really his story of this young boy at 14, realizing what it means to be a colored male in this society, dreaming of going to Paris, getting away from it, then having those dreams smashed and realizing he's going to have to stay the rest of his life as a member of this minority in New Orleans and never really live in a culture where he can just be a person.
It's almost worse that he's not even black, because he's given the illusion that the world is laid open to him, but it really isn't. He's only laid open to a certain point, so it's almost in a way more frustrating for him.
Mm-hmm. That was something I wanted very much to develop in the beginning of that book, that he was almost the victim of manners, that everybody around him was so well-bred and so polite and so didn't talk about what was really going on, that it came as just a stultifying revelation to him when he realized that he was not white.
Can you describe for 1 second just what the Feast of All Saints is?
Feast of All Saints is November 1st, and it's the day I mentioned earlier. It's All Saints' Day when they go to the cemeteries. It was the day when everyone would go and visit in the cemeteries, fix up the graves, eat a picnic lunch, that type of thing. And it's people outside New Orleans misunderstand it. They thought it was a festival to celebrate the dead. It's not. It's to remember the dead and to celebrate life. It's a little bit different. And it's the kind of festival that only happens in a culture where death is very much a part of life. I mean, it's inconceivable to think of that in California today, where it's almost an obscenity to die or to mention death, or, or anything to do with death, where everybody pretends it absolutely doesn't exist. But anyway, it was a big New Orleans festival, and I named my book that because I saw it as a sort of a celebration or a personal celebration of the free people of color, like going to the cemetery and putting a wreath before their graves. I mean, they had been forgotten, and I saw the book as kind of like making an offering.
Like a
so
wreath.
That was it.
Yeah.
Also, that feast and those words are associated with New Orleans. I mean, when the Saints go marching in is an old song that's been associated with it. They name the ball team the Saints. It's a phrase that's just part of New Orleans history. It seemed to be just exactly the right phrase to use.
I guess what we're looking at now is one of those famous cemeteries from New Orleans.
Right. This is actually the wall of the cemeteries. All the cemeteries have these sort of oven-like graves built into the walls, and that's what they were called in the old days, ovens. And people sometimes just rented these graves for periods of time so they could have a nice burial, and then afterwards the bones were taken out and the grave was rented to someone else. But let me turn the page and show you, I think, some more.
They weren't actually burned in there, were they?
Oh, no, they were just called ovens because they looked like brick ovens. But, I mean, the people were buried in coffins, and then the coffin was taken out later. And this is a more elaborate grave, and this is the kind of grave you see all over New Orleans in various cemeteries. The cemeteries are right in the middle of the city. They have white walls around them, and they're filled with this kind of large grave, and the graves are in all different conditions of decay. It's a real romantic trip to go walking through New Orleans cemeteries. You can peer into broken graves and see bones and skulls and all kinds of things. But this is a very common sight.
They actually have bones and skulls lying.
Yes, you can go into the. Right now, I'm working on the sequel to Interview with the Vampire, and in the sequel, I'm describing the Lafayette Cemetery. It takes place near the Lafayette Cemetery, which is a cemetery near the Garden District where I grew up. And you can go into the Lafayette today, and you can go and look through broken marble doors to these graves, and you can see cast iron coffins that have almost completely rusted, and you can see the skulls and the bones in those coffins. I don't particularly like to do that. I prefer to just walk through and have romantic thoughts about the architecture, and I don't like to touch those things, But I was there with my husband a few years ago, and he reached in and touched the bones, which I thought was really sacrilegious. I got very frightened, actually. Of course, this is in broad daylight. I would never go in those cemeteries after dark, but we used to go there as kids. We used to walk through with our dad in the evening, and he used to point out the yellow fever graves to us, the graves that had lists of whole families that had died during the terrible yellow fever epidemics in New Orleans. And it's part of the landscape of my childhood, to wander past those little wrought iron fences and benches. The graves had benches in front of them because for years on the Feast of All Saints, all the New Orleans families would go to the graves, and they would not only clean up the grave and scrub the tombstone and put flowers, but they would visit with one another, and they would sit on those benches and receive guests, all day long. And I think they used to sell gumbo and all kinds of refreshments in the cemeteries. And by my time, it wasn't quite that festive. People just went and put flowers.